friends. Welcome back to Seed Club's podcast. I'm Jess, your host, and today we have a very special episode for you. The tables are being turned on me. I will be the interviewee, and Steph is a community member and contributor to Seed Club, and she had suggested that it might be useful for her to interview me on this Seed Club podcast episode. And so that's what we've done. We dive into Seed Club's origin story, dig into the learning while doing model that we hold as a core value at Seed Club. We also got into the Seed Club token drop and the lessons we learned, and dive into how people often refer to Seed Club as the Web3 YCombinator. She gives me some space to sort of pull apart the similarities and some of the differences that we believe exist between the two organizations. I'm going to turn this over to Steph. Let's jump into it.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm really excited that you agreed to have me talk to you on the podcast. And I feel like I have some good juicy questions, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't start off with a softball. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had this question for a while, and maybe you've answered it in various other places, but can you just walk us through the Seed Club origin story?
Yeah, I've heard that there's actually a number of people who've asked me this lately, and they're like, where did this? So we're actually working on something right now that's going to at least allow us to share this story more broadly. But yeah, I mean, usually the way I answer that is it all started with 11 people in a Telegram chat. But there's, I think even before that, there had been a number of people really interested in DAOs for the longest time. And I think there was also a lot of frustration in the lack of progress that people were making with DAOs. And there's a lot of philosophy and structure and thinking about token economics. And there's full process and the whole big platforms that are being developed and not a whole lot of progress. And so it was in the summer of 2020 where we just saw these people start to make use of tools that started to exist on Ethereum to do cool things. So easy ability to mint a token, the ability to kind of gate access to a community using something like Collabland, and the fact that you could have a market for anything through AMMs like Uniswap were just these sort of three new superpowers that we started seeing and my friends just started using in interesting ways. So Brian Flynn was using it to gate access to his newsletter that he'd been writing for a number of years. Alex Masmej used it to raise some money so he could go and move to San Francisco, which he didn't do, but then he ended up doing, and now he is. June was using it for bringing people together for his meetup, and you had to stake some to be able to access. So this idea of social tokens had started to sort of take hold, and it was sort of built on top of other people who were using tokens like Ruben Bramanathan for his council token that were representing an hour of his time, or Pew token was representing tweets. There was just a lot of fun experimentation happening. And I got really intrigued by it, mostly intrigued by the fact that there was crazy price action on some of these early tokens. So Karma DAO went from being $2 to buy in to $2,000 to buy in the course of 2 days. The Jam token went all crazy as well. And while, some of those were maybe early examples that weren't long-term sustainable, it was very clear that there was a bunch of energy there. And so when I started talking to the people behind these things, they all had very similar questions. And there was a sense that there was something there, but that nobody really knew what the there was. And so we spun up a Telegram chat, and there's 11 people in it, and turned out just to be a network of really fascinating, competent, brilliant human beings that just started to ask questions, find answers that uncovered more questions, and ultimately led to Seed Club as it is today.
I wonder how many other origin stories start with a Telegram chat in Web3.
Many. Many do.
Many. That's my guess. So I mean, why Seed Club then? Out of all of these questions that were popping up, why this particular model?
Well, I think at the core, I always describe Seed Club as a learning network. And, we started off trying to figure out what social tokens were. And, I think that the thing that was missing generally, it had been missing from crypto for a long time. And it was just people using it and experimenting with it and more users or consumers. And so we felt or saw an opportunity at least to be active in bringing more use cases to the space. And through doing that, we would learn lots. And also there could potentially be a really useful business model here as well. So at the core, Seed Club supports great founders to come together with other people who have some experience to help launch community DAOs or social tokens. And we earn a percentage of the tokens for doing that work. And ultimately allows us to create an incentive layer where those people who have launched tokens come back and support the next batch. So I think it was a mixture of how can we truly learn faster? Well, we need more examples out there and want to be as close to them as possible. And then two, it ultimately saw that there was a direction to make this sustainable, which was have a business model wrapped around it. So those are the two core things that we do today. Like we have an incentive network that helps to bring great people together to help launch tokens. And we continue to learn with the most interesting projects at the edges, and the edges keep getting more and varied and further out there, and we keep learning.
I think this learning while doing model is at least in my experience, is what makes the space just so fun right now. I hope that doesn't go away anytime soon. Do you think it will?
No, I mean, I think you get at like a really big question there, which is, can we design away all the friction that exists in Web3? Because I think at the core of like why it's important to learn through doing in Web3 is that it's a different thing when you're interacting with value, when you have responsibility for your data and for your actions, when you have a sense of ownership in everything, and when those things that you can kind of put together or create can actually have big impact, large reach, be very valuable. And so I think there's like the friction will be reduced across many of the things that we're used to doing today that are kind of challenging to a degree. I still think that Web3 is a new paradigm ultimately, and removing that sort of self-custody of one's assets and responsibility is, don't think something that you can get rid of. So I think there is this learning curve that's going to be necessary regardless, at least to interact meaningfully in the broader ecosystem. But I do think that it will get easier, and then really where the valuable things are will be further and further out. And we've always sort of looked at DAOs or community tokens or things that we're building as being more the evolution of a startup than the evolution of like a membership site or a newsletter, and where value gets created in these organizations through innovation and through experimentation and through creativity, rather than sort of running a playbook or growth hacking or purely just sort of growing a subscriber count. And nothing wrong with those, obviously, like great businesses. And I'm sure we'll see a number of DAOs do that. But I think the act of experimenting while doing in community is really where the big opportunity exists today and will probably continue to exist.
Yeah, I feel like that makes a lot of sense to me. What I hear you saying is like the sort of tooling, the sort of mechanisms that enable the experimentation and innovation will get a little bit more frictionless, but that will then make room for even more of that experimentation and innovation.
Yeah, I think like big picture, most of these mechanisms and platforms become commodities sooner than later. And you can start to see this even in how Mirror's treating its plugins, right? It's like saying, hey, actually, like there's not going to be a competitive advantage or lock-in on any of these tools. Like if you need to go mint a token, you could go do it in 10 different places. You might as well come do it here. There's not significant difference between those two. And so what's going to happen is we're just going to have more and more and more Legos to go play with. And so it's going to come down to how we put those together and how we build narratives around them, how we involve people in our adventure, how we build momentum, all these pieces. And for sure, there's integration and development, and without a doubt, there'll be some standout products there. But I think the fact that these tools will be commodities that are accessible to all and will only increase in trust and accessibility, I think is the reason why I have such a firm belief that value will flow to communities on the internet, not just the technology.
Totally. And so you just mentioned minting tokens a second ago, and I want to ask you about the Seed Club token drop. I happened to join the Discord, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks before then, and it felt like a tsunami on my end. And I'm just so curious, what was it like on the inside? What lessons did you learn? Take us through it.
Yeah, I mean, so for the longest time, Club or Seed Club and the Club token was not publicly available. It was a private DAO, and we managed who it was distributed to. The token was non-transferable. There was no market for it, and that was all by design. I think we believe that who you bring together early on really sets a culture of the organization, and we were very thoughtful about how we onboarded people. And yeah, we had a very clear mission, which was helping to support these projects be successful. And I didn't really benefit from having like the broadest community with just permissionless access. And so the intention has always been for Seed Club to be governed by our members. The tokens allow us to have that. It has been governed by our members since day one, but we wanted that to be who we consider members to be a lot broader moving forward. And so, yeah, the DAO made a vote at the end of in December to distribute a Club token more broadly and open up the DAO. Yeah, I mean, look, we had spent there's like a whole token working group that was spun up around it, and had spent a number of months exploring the right way to do this. And this balance of wanting to make sure that we were giving early governance votes and membership to people that would be good stewards. We wanted to make sure we were recognizing our core constituents, which were the people who had come and launched projects with us and the projects themselves. And so we focused on thinking through what an appropriate airdrop would be to begin that broader distribution of membership in Seed Club. And so that took a bunch of time trying to get those numbers right. And I think we're going to see this in our accelerators. We're walking through that topic in the next couple of weeks. Like there's no right answer here. And there's a lot of debate on how you should go about doing an airdrop, if you should do an airdrop, how you should distribute membership. Core to C Club, we say great people, great projects. We want to recognize both of those so that we have an amazing set of projects that have got to work with an amazing set of early collaborators or partners within C Club. And those partners want to work with the most amazing projects, and the next version of projects want to work with the next amazing group of partners. And so we wanted to make sure that we were recognizing both those constituencies as major recipients of the club airdrop. We also had a number of people who'd supported us through a variety of token sales in the past. So our M Club crowdfund that we done, I think back in the day, one of like the earliest NFTs as sponsorship unlock tokens. And so we represented those. And then we also had auctioned off an NFT for a fundraising announcement we'd done. And so those, along with some holders of at least 2 tokens. So we wanted to also recognize early social token users, members. So if people held 2 of FWB, Forefront, Right, and Bankless, they would have been eligible for an airdrop as well. So that's sort of like the thinking through how does it get distributed? And then we also needed to think through, well, how do we functionally do it? And so we're able to work with some developers or friends over at Agora to help support. They've been working on a new product around minting a token with a little bit more flexibility, vesting contracts that would allow us to ensure that there's a long-term alignment between our early team and early founding members and people who are working more core to C Club. And then also a claims contract that would allow people to actually go and claim those. So all that stuff was custom built, but with the mind of making it available to other C Club projects, which we're excited to hopefully roll out with a number of projects this time around. We also launched it over Christmas, which I think was a very purposeful move, but also like every time I say this, I apologize to the team for suggesting this because things don't always go smoothly and we definitely had a few hiccups. But the reason we did it was we're firm believers in getting tokens in the hands of the right people, not all people. And when you're in the middle of a bull market, which I think arguably still are to a degree, it's very easy for people to just want to ape in, as they say, and can really lean into sort of speculative, crazy price action rather than more deliberate exposure to tokens. So I had this idea of we didn't want the token or airdrop to be the first time somebody heard of or interacted with C Club, but rather for the token to be the thing that rewarded people's previous interactions. And I think we did a pretty good job of that, though, again, apologies to my team for Christmas and New Year's.
There goes Christmas. Well, actually, on the topic of the team, you were giving out some major team love on Friday, and I want to ask you about the C Club team. Y'all can see it, but Jess is like pumping his arms right now. Yeah, I'm new to the C Club team. I am like utterly blown away by just like the magic and the brilliance and just like the playfulness of this team. Yeah, I have some specific questions, but do you want to just like quickly send some flowers? It's Valentine's Day after all.
Yeah. Well, so like I think I was having a reflective moment Friday afternoon, taking a deep breath, and it was the first week of our 4th cohort of Accelerator. Like all these sort of like it's a relentless drumbeat because there's never enough time to do all the things you want to do, and so like what I witnessed throughout last week was just the emergence of just this powerful new structure. Like, we've been building with sort of broad membership and distributed governance from day one, but what we had been much slower to sort of grow the team and provide more pathways for people to contribute because we had to figure a lot of things out, but we had started doing that towards the end of last year and really started to expand the number of team members that were contributing to C Club. And what I saw at the end of last week was just these like engines of collaboration and creation that were just firing it. And I had like nothing to do with any of them, really. Like they were all just happening and things were happening at a level that we can only really dream of before. And so one of the most exhilarating moments, I think, as you start to stand up one of these projects, is you start to see, it's this moment where you see people in a Discord chat, voice channel talking that you had no idea even existed. And you're like, oh, what even is that? And it's like this emergent behavior that we're so excited about in DAOs generally happening. I felt that times like 100, where we have some of our earliest team members, Nicole and Ben, who've just been incredibly impactful from day one. And we were joined by Josh and John. And then Pandy stepped in and really has taken community. And obviously you're leaning in, and Sarah's leaning in, and Samsonite and Peace Note. And everybody was just sort of like, it was just sort of like the sense of agency I think people have recognized. And each and every one of those people have really leaned in and taken that and really leveled up in some way. And so whether that's Pandy coming in and just being like, oh, wow, here's all these challenges. Let me make sense of it. And how could I go pull in resources to do it? And just seeing how incredibly effective she was at that. Or same with, Nicole and running Accelerator, like these just incredibly brilliant women coming in and making this thing theirs and taking such care and love and responsibility for it was just absolutely incredible. And you see that across, Josh is leading product team, and there's just people building stuff and things are getting shipped. And Peace Node makes us look great and truly so driven to outdo himself every single time. Like the level of production, and it just gets greater and greater and greater and greater. And Samsonite, who I would shout out every single one of these podcasts, even though you might not hear it because he probably edits it out. It's just, creating this heartbeat for us to continue to communicate our message here at C Club and the exciting things we're working on. And Sarah, who's really going to start to bring a bunch of events together. And many more that I can't even get to right now. Our welcome group, our vibe squad. Well, Thursday afternoon, Myrna and Zach are running Clubhouse chats, which are just absolutely incredible. And people are showing up and they do such a great job. And so I think there's a couple of inflection points that I've had in this process. One is this feeling of having ownership when somebody gives you an NFT or a token that represents a say in an organization. There's this different type of connection that gets created there. And if you haven't experienced that, you probably don't fully grasp this thing. And so that's sort of step one. And then I think that the evolution of that is when you start to see people who are like, oh yeah, these resources are ours and this opportunity is ours. And I can step in and make this be what I think it should be and collaborate with other great people. It's pretty incredible. But I think it comes right back to this idea of just, we haven't tried to grow incredibly fast. We're very thoughtful about who sort of fits the mold, at least from the community vibe perspective. And there's not any formal gates to that, but it's just sort of people who've been able to come in that try out and do some work. And, you're on the early stages of what I keep telling you is our long-term plan, just to suck you right into C Club through the brilliance of the people you get to work with here. And it's kind of working, I think.
It's 100% working. No one could see what I was beaming because it's so true. And you really, at least my experience is you just kind of don't really have an idea of just the brilliance on the inside. And I feel like that's where I'm really interested in making that more known. That's a little bit of the genesis of this conversation too.
Yeah, I mean, I love, because I saw a tweet over this weekend, which was some little snippet that was shared on the Accelerator. We know that there's sort of two constituents or two communities that we're trying to serve. One of them is sort of our projects and our alumni, people who are supporting the growth of these really great projects. And then there's the broader community that we get to serve through education and through insights and, hopefully create pathways for them to support both the growth of C Club and projects and for them to become members and owners and any of the number of amazing projects that come through C Club. But when we're growing an organization, you can't do all the things at the same time. And so we've really focused in on that first bucket, which means that a lot of the information that we're creating is being created behind closed doors. And the dynamic when you're working with early stage projects, at least it's the belief we hold to be true for now, is that you can't really just expose that to the general public. You can't make that just completely open. It's not helpful for a founder to have 10,000 points of view when they really just need one who can help them sort of reason through this challenge. And so there's sort of this smaller community that's actually supporting the core work that we do with projects. And so, just to see that, I know there's just so much genius in that, and how do we, the little bits of being able to make that more public have been incredible, and very excited for you to lean in and help expose that more, and for us to, I think, continue to open up more and be more engaged with our broader community, because that's, I think, really where we can take these things that are working in smaller pockets and sort of expand them out to our broader community. That's where we start to see that next level of leverage and opportunity.
I totally agree. I want to quickly just pivot. I want to ask some more questions about you, Jess. I hope I'm making you sweat. Yeah, I've heard, just in the Web3 verse, people refer to Seed Club as the YCombinator of Web3. And I know that you also have a lot of thoughts on VCs. Let's hear them. And how does this make you feel when you hear people say YCombinator of Web3?
YCombinator is an institution. It's led the whole growth of accelerators. It's led to the growth of startups as we know them right now. And so, I think it would be an absolute honor to be referred to as that for this new space, and for us to actually feel like we've earned it. I think we're still a little ways away from that and new. And I think where it falls down in my mind is we're not trying to build Y Combinator for Web3. To me, C Club is an example of a community that's putting tokens to use to create some value. And we just want to be like an example of that. And I think core to that belief is that communities are networks, and tokens give these new assets, and we always say tokens are superpowers that these networks can use to align incentives, to reward people, to bring some future value into the present, to really build a sense-making network. And so I think what we're really trying to do is think of like, what does a networked accelerator look like, or what does a great DAO look like? And for us, a great DAO is like, we have a very clear goal, right? We want to bring in the best projects and people. We want to support them as best we can through their launch and moving on. And we want to represent that relationship through a token swap, ultimately. So tokens that we get to hold and that ultimately that project gets to hold. And so we don't invest in companies or projects through C Club DAO. We support them and they become parts of our network and without a doubt help unlock resources and tools, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a fairly big difference. And so instead of projects coming through C Club, getting money, us having ownership stake in them, and they go out into the world, really projects get ownership in C Club and we get sort of a sense of ownership in their projects as well. And so that's fundamentally different. And our job really is to continue to build out this network and represent that network through token ownership and participation. And the big question of like, how do we go do that well in this new world with these new tools, these new rails, these new opportunities is the one that we lean into every single day and start to have some insight on and in. And C Club isn't out there taking equity positions in organizations. There's clear limitations on what we're able to do and how we're able to go do them. And I think creates at least a lane for us to explore in a really interesting way what types of projects are worthy of backing and could be valuable in the future or could have impact in the future. And so I think you see this in the types of projects we get to work with. Many of these projects are starting with community and not starting with product. And so that's usually not something that would be venture backable or at least investable or backable generally. We believe that's not the case. We think that the world's changed and that you can lean in with community first and unlock a whole bunch of new opportunities. I also think that you see that through how people are in our community. So if you come to our demo day, it's not people standing up talking about LTVs and CACs and your last round. People are sharing this adventure they're on, and we have DJs, and it's just like a lot more fun. And if we think about how do you build one of these sense-making networks well, I think, well, you got to create a space that people want to be a part of, and that doesn't feel like the old stodgy world. And so yeah, Y Combinator, cool. They've done amazing things, but C Club's different. You also had a question about VCs, and I think this is actually a really interesting one. Do you want me to get into it?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the old stodgy world. Should we go there?
Yeah, I think there's like big shock. Twitter doesn't leave a whole lot of room for nuance in conversations, and so you get these sort of polarizing worldviews, and maybe on a long enough time horizon, everybody's just shitposting memes like Mark Andreessen and my homie David Phelps. Well done, guys. But I think like some VCs are useless, not good, and some are great. And how do you make sense of that world? And it's kind of hard if you're a new founder. And I think the big benefits we have in Web3 and crypto is that there's like a lot of money floating around still to this day, and it puts founders and communities in the driver's seat for the most part. And that shift in power is actually a great thing. And that comes from sort of a decentralized or democratization of access to capital, right? So there's new DAOs that are investing, there's a lot of angels that are investing. There's sort of like this, for some projects, a more permissionless, accessible way of participating, even if you're not accredited, though talk to your own lawyers about that, etc. Don't listen to me. So I think that creates a much better dynamic. C Club has worked with a number of larger investors, and some that we'll continue to explore, because there's also like a big benefit to having partners who have a very long-term time horizon and that who are professional. And yeah, there's a ton of benefit in getting your community on board, and that should be priority number one. For most projects today, you have more opportunities to generate revenue or funding than you ever had before, whether it's through NFT sales or crowd funds or direct investments. And also one of those options is to work with really great long-term capital providers and partners who are going to hold through the ups and downs that are going to happen over the next couple of years and really have an aligned vision on like that bigger opportunity that exists. And so for some projects, that's going to be the right path to go down. If you think about, we're trying to build this network, and a big part of our ability to do our work at C Club is having a valuable network, or at least a network with some value. So people want to at least hold on to the club tokens. They see that as a useful reward to lean in and to contribute and to earn. And so we think through, how do we go build that network into something of value? And that's a big question, but ultimately requires some capital to do.
Can you say a little bit more about your relationship to those long-term capital advisors? Like you mentioned before, there's totally this a little bit of like a VCs or the boogeyman kind of feel. What do you, Jess, look for like as a person when you're looking at a more sort of traditional funding source? How do you know it's aligned?
I mean, I think the most valuable thing that I have in the space generally is just a lot of, I call it my own sense-making network. I just have friends who I trust, who have friends who they trust. There is very much this, and I recognize that it can be a barrier to entry. And I definitely felt it when I was early in the space as well, where I didn't have these folks around me, built and got bigger and more sophisticated. And so, yeah, most people that we work with have come through introductions. Really can't think of a cold outreach that at least wasn't vetted by somebody else in our community. These are all new folks that came into C Club early on, had conversations with myself or others that were sort of the vibe check, as we call it. The idea is, are these people values aligned? Like, do they care about the things that we care about? Do they have a history of being good actors in the space or not? Word gets around very quickly. Founders talk. Like, there's, your actions are immutable to a degree, but I think like the conversation mill is a lot more impactful than many may realize. And so, yeah, it's a mixture of getting a good vibe check with somebody, seeing if their values align, and seeing how they've treated and interacted with other projects in the past. And again, I think we're lucky in that there's just a lot of money and a lot of opportunity, and there's always more demand than there is sort of supply for great projects today as we speak. And so we can be very picky about who we work with. And in fact, the hardest part has been for us that we haven't been able to work with all the people that we thought would be really great and values aligned. And so we've had to say no to a lot of really great potential partners. I think one of my skills is the social side of things and connecting with people. And so I think we have a team and a broader community that is similarly focused. Like, they want to work with great people who are building interesting things, have long-term mindset, who care about human beings, care about the idea of people earning profits rather than the platforms. And I feel like this is one of those things that is just kind of we got good at, but don't know exactly how we got good at it.
Totally. And I feel like that's a little bit indicative of something else I want to chat with you about too. We're in this space, in the blockchain space, and there are some things that are just not measurable. They're just not going to be capturable. And this sounds like one of those things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a big line of questioning or exploration in Web3 is this idea of reputation. And like, can you capture reputation on chain? And I think you can capture a lot, but there's a whole lot of how you work and who you are and how you show up. And that I think it's a very human thing and is always going to be that way. And it's not to say that that's going to be consistent across all communities. To me, like the way that we expand the space generally is we just make it very easy for people to spin up their own thing, to do their own thing, to find their own people, to work with people that they vibe with.
I was snapping my fingers just now because that's exactly where I wanted to go with this. I was listening to the episode that you did with Alex from Friends with Benefits. And at the top of the episode, you said that this episode changed your mind about the way you were thinking about reputation in Web3. And I felt like I listened to that episode, but I didn't get a sense of where you were before and after. I would love to hear more about it.
Well, I think I'm like, on-chain reputation. Like, I just think it's like not useful was my default reaction before. And like, I have a number of friends who are deep in this, creating really great products in this space, and I think all very worthwhile efforts. But I put such high value on people, and I think there's an argument that building great DAOs or startups or whatever are more about team building than process or product building. Like, how do you bring great people I think that's very, very true within DAOs. Like, there's a lot of psychological safety and creativity. Like, all these things are incredibly important, and I don't think those things get captured on chain in any way, really, or in any useful way, at least. And so I think I was thinking about it very much from like a credentialing, like reputation. How do I think you're going to use this reputation to like filter out potential applicants to a role, or and to make that useful? So I think there's without a doubt a piece that's useful there. But when Alex is talking about reputation within a world or within a network, that started to make a lot more sense to me. And so, yeah, I don't know if I've fully gamed this out, but knowing within FWB specifically, knowing the things that somebody's done, the length of time they've done it, what level of contribution they've made, whether that's on-chain or off-chain. I could almost imagine even badges being useful in there, where again, perhaps outside the context of like a game or like a world or border, not super useful, but within can be incredibly useful. So, and then specifically rewarding governance using past actions as an example of commitment as a way of sort of either adding a multiple or unlocking certain governance actions, or saying, hey, if you've been very active in governance, you get XYZ. Like those become really simple, easy ways, I think, of putting reputation to work. And I think constantly my lessons in life have just been that definitions matter quite a bit. And the way that I define something in my mind is very different than, I mean, I think we just had this call this morning where I think we just, in our core team, where we talked through the definitions of things and that's really was, we just had different definitions of the same word. And therefore that was where the block was. So I think that's probably the case with reputation. And Alex just helped to unlock that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think what I hear you saying too is that there's a version of quote unquote on-chain reputation that makes a lot of sense within a specific container. So like in this situation or in this use case, it's FWB, and that there's a clear sort of value prop for people to join FWB. People know why they're there and people know why they're taking certain actions. And so those are the kinds of things that they probably want to look for when they're trying to make connections within that space. And so they're like much easier to put on chain versus like when I heard you talking earlier about your relationship to more traditional VCs that use this word trust. And that word feels just so alive for me in this space right now. And like you really can't put trust on chain. It really is like a vibe. And I mean, we're not even person to person, we're not even IRL, but there's still so much to be gained from the trust that's built by these kinds of things, like where we're on camera and just having these conversations. And yeah, you can't really capture that on chain.
Yeah. I think it is useful to try to, though, and maybe that's a better way of even capturing some of my changing thoughts on this, because I think within the VCs, yeah, I would love for all VCs to put their investments on chain and prove to me, if you're saying, well, yeah, I'm a long-term holder and I want to be a part of this project for the next 10 years, well, then prove to me that you've held on to the previous investments you made for 5 or 10 years. Like, it's very easy to do, just doesn't happen very often. Same thing within like even thinking about C Club, right? Like if we're going to continue to have our community be core decision makers on which projects get in, it would probably be useful for us to understand who is consistently a great decision maker. And we'd be able to have that data ultimately if we say, okay, well, you voted for this and then this project was successful over the long period of time, we're probably going to identify a subset of people who are better at making those decisions, or at least I'd be able to identify folks who are not great at making those decisions. And so regardless of how that data might be used, it's probably worthwhile trying to start capturing it with the goal in mind.
Totally. I guess this question may or may not relate, but this is a little bit of this could go in many different directions. But I feel like there's so much in this conversations that are happening in Web3 around what's the vision? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? And I feel more curious about what scares you. Like what feels kind of risky?
That's a great question. So I think like for me, the biggest thing that I really take seriously is the level of trust that teams and individuals are putting into C Club when they join. It's like no small thing to dedicate the amount of time and effort and to align themselves with our organization and the way they do. And to get to where we want to get to with the type of support and value we can create, it's going to be a never-ending evolution. So it scares me to ever under-deliver for any of those projects. My hope is that we haven't and that we won't, but I'm sure it will happen at some point. And, it's just a sort of the natural part of growing. And so, yeah, that's really the core of my fear is, are we building the right organization to support these projects in the way that they need it? Because at the core, what are we? Again, we're bringing great people and great projects together. And, we need to over deliver on both of those to really build a valuable organization that will allow us to continue to do this into the future. I also think there's sort of like probably a lot of things that we're getting wrong generally as a space. Like if you think about the evolution that's happened over the last 5 years, like there's been some pretty big epochal shifts. And so I think I really want to make sure that we're continuing to lean into the reality of the day, which is that there's still a lot of experimentation. We're still very much at the early part of the idea maze, and that we need to lean into that. And so you'll see us work with a number of different projects. We're not trying to just double down on certain templates or models, because there's a good chance that this isn't the best way or the right way, or definitely not the only way. And so I think like getting some fundamental things wrong and not being able to recognize it early enough is also a fear, though it's something we spend a lot of time on. And I guess like the third piece there is like, we're still, we're talking about trust quite a bit. The scaling of these organizations is sort of like the big question and unlock. And it's about continuing to push, create resources to the edges, align these teams as they start to grow. And so thinking through everything from the legal, the practical, the functional pieces to actually grow those organizations are things that I just think have high impact. And there's a lot of other experiments that are out in the space that I feel like Seed Club is just in a wonderful position because we just get to collaborate and pull from and work with like the best examples that exist out there. But yeah, I think there's like, we're interacting in the wild world of Web3 and things can happen. And yeah, just really want to make sure that we're giving the best advice, supporting exploration as best we can, and reducing the risk wherever possible.
And I totally see that in the evolution of Seed Club from LFG to LFTG. I just feel like that just like captures the vibe so well. I know I just said that I didn't want to ask the question that everyone asked, but I'm going to ask the question that everyone asks now. So you talk about the projects, and it's so clear that Seed Club really is about the projects and really is about the people. What do you want to see projects do? How do you want to see projects evolve or emerge after they leave the accelerator?
I love just how my natural reaction is like a million different ways, because there's just so many different types of projects. I think like the nexus is, it comes, when I talk to other, say, investors in the space or folks that maybe aren't super tied into the DAO world, or maybe they're more in DeFi or they're more traditional startups, the point that is so obvious to me, but is not to many, is just the fact that in Web3, we can push with community rather than just product. And that becomes a whole new path that we can go down. And so what I want Seed Club to be, and what I hope our projects become, are just shining beacons, examples of building community first and representing community as owners and participants and members on this grand adventure that becomes big and successful and not only economically viable, but massively impactful on the broader economy. So I think Kristen Stone, who's a wonderful early collaborator with Seed Club and done a lot of work in the Balancer ecosystem, paraphrased a conversation we had where she said on Web 2 starts with product and Web 3 starts with community. And I think we just want to prove that building with community first can be a very valuable and impactful, exciting and creative way to build organizations. So when I think about DAOs, communities with tokens being the evolution of the startup, that's a new starting point, what might emerge. And we're seeing really early, like Bored Ape Yacht Club, like them or hate them, like it's a very novel model. Cryptohun3y, very novel model. These are like really, really interesting. Friends with Benefits. These are like creating very new types of organizations. And some of them are going to work, some of them aren't going to work. I hope we get to be in the learning seat for all of that. And that, yeah, let's go a couple years down the road and we have communities that are worth billions of dollars that are owned by and governed by individuals from around the world. And that, there's a very clear path to being a productive member of society that includes potentially working for one or multiple DAOs.
I mean, I feel like that's a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. I do have one more question. So your handle is Thattallguy. How tall are you?
So I usually answer that question by doing this in real life, which is just me putting my hand up there because I get that variety of parts, through my day. But I'm 6'7" or 201 centimeters, which I think justifies the Thattallguy handle. But so I was really early into social media, and so Twitter in 2006 or 7 or something like that. And they had, back in the day, they had tweet ups. Did you ever go to a tweet up? Did you ever heard about these tweet ups? Yeah, because this was a thing. This is the nerdiest thing ever. You'd have tweet ups, which is like, if you were a Twitter user, you'd go to a bar and meet other Twitter users early on. And so I was trying to think of I don't even know what my first Twitter handle was, but I was just like, oh, if I'm going to be out and about, maybe it'd be great personal branding if I said Thattallguy. And so people would be like, oh, who is that? It'd be Thattallguy, because I'd be the tallest guy generally around. So that's the nexus of Thattallguy. And then I almost switched it to my name, but then I'm very glad I didn't, because crypto just really has made the internet fun and weird again, and you can lean into fun nicknames.
Yeah, it's a fabulous handle and totally well deserved. I'm 5'3", so I might as well dox my height since you're going to dox yours.
That's been the funniest thing.
I am not anywhere near that tall guy.
Meeting people in real life, it's just like, oh, you are a lot smaller. Oh, you're a lot taller than. I think this is really going to be a lot of people's experience. I think this next week as people go to Denver and.
Yeah.
They're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know you're going to wrap up, but can I just switch it on you for one quick second?
Oh, sure.
You are one of our newest contributors. Why did you choose to lean in with us at Seed Club?
That is a really good question. Seed Club was actually my second Discord server, which I feel like is a pretty is a pretty big deal. The first one doesn't really count. It was like I was like invited by a friend. So Seed Club was my first like organic. I went out and joined. And I joined M Club because it just seemed smaller. There was like a very clear way to enter. They had some bounties at the time. Got my first social tokens from M Club and met John Selke. John and I just like instantly connected, and John sort of had been like carroting me and sort of pulling me in, and I just like, we're talking about this word trust. I just like really had deep trust in John, and it's just like one of those things that you just like I can't really tell you why, but it was there. And to be honest, as John was sort of like trying to pull me in more, I was like, I have a lot of questions. I said use this word trust with John. It's like trust is really important to me in this space, and I feel like I've made a lot of really deep connections, and I want to ensure that anywhere that I land feels really aligned on the trust part, because I take commitments really seriously. And so John was like, all right, well, like, how are we going to make that happen? Who do you want to talk to? And I was like, I want to talk to everybody. I want to just like get the vibe. And so that's like sort of the genesis of us having that like funny chat on your birthday. And so I was so pleasantly surprised. I was like, I can't believe this space is so fabulous and so wonderful and so brilliant and just so collaborative in a way that I've never experienced before. There's just like so much yes happening, even within it's always yes and, I should say, which just feels like a really important thing to have in our lives in this moment in time in general.
Yeah, I love that. And big shout out to John. I don't know if I gave him enough of a shout out earlier on. He finds the gaps and the challenges and kind of just like goes and solves them, which is like a very, very important thing to do in this world, as there are many, many gaps and challenges. So shout out to John Selke and you can trust the dude. I don't know. I met him in person once before, so I know he's real, which is exciting.
He's real.
He's real.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're sort of in this moment where it's such a wonderful time because there is so much possibility, and the reality is sort of, we don't have to like, there's no profit and loss sheets. There's like a lot of things that will come, I think, as you start to think of what these organizations need to be. And without a doubt, there's that, talking about budgets and all this sort of stuff exists as well. But there's such an immense amount of leverage that can be had by going and building and doing cool and interesting things and by serving people well. And our early belief is that like having a long-term mindset is going to be one of the big differentiators between us and people that we get to work with and others. And I think that means that we're wanting to make sure that we position ourselves to have the resources and the bandwidth to be able to go and do that thing well for a long period of time. And if we can do that, we're going to learn faster, we're going to find opportunities faster, and we're going to create something of lasting value. And so I think so much of that yes and is people realizing just the raw materials and the opportunity that we have here. And you get into this positive feedback loop pretty quickly by putting stuff out and sort of seeing that rewarded and people get excited about it. And even back to our last call we had where there's just these number of things that kind of bubbled up that you just see the team go, oh, that's a thing and we need to go do that. That's just like enough of a signal that it's worthwhile to go do because people just got stoked on it. And that's maybe the thing that I started seeing when you're asking the question about like why I was so stoked on last week was I just saw like that happening across this big field of flowers that were kind of popping up and blossoming and being moved in the wind.
Yeah. More of that.
More of that. Well, if you're looking to join an amazing team, Seed Club has a number of roles that we'll be hiring for soon. Always be recruiting, as my friend Jake says.
Always be recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, we're ecstatic to have you leading in. And I think this, the gift that you have of being able to distill and clearly communicate things in a consistent and impactful way is very evident. And I know our community is going to be greatly benefited by having whatever time and brain power you're able to dedicate to us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having so much fun. I hope it comes through. Like it feels really fun.
Good. Steph, thank you so much for your great questions today on the Club podcast. Yes, I'm still sweating from turning the microphone the other way around. This thing just kind of like was born from the ether and has got this momentum of its own. And I have cared for it deeply for a number of months, and to see other people take it up and care for it so deeply as well, it's just like that's what hits me in the feels. And then to think that that's just going to continue to grow. And if we do well, we're going to have these nodes of people caring greatly about this thing that we collectively care about greatly. That's fucking cool.
Yeah, that's fucking cool. Jess, thank you for letting me take over your show for a hot second and ask you all the questions and talk about your feels. I am so here for it, and I think the space is a better place for Seed Club, and I'm stoked. I'm stoked for what we're going to do next.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Steph.